this could be one of the biggest wealth drops in Canadian history, and we're going to go through it right now and dig into exactly what is going on. So Canadian households see a big drop in real wages ahead of Bank of Canada. I've been looking for a long time for a real wage growth chart, and they have one which you can use in here, which I thought was great. So Canadian households continue to see higher inflation in the coming months. They expect prices to rise 7.2% over the next 12 months, according to the Q4 2022 survey. So that doesn't bode well for people who are expecting the Bank of Canada to do nothing. I really don't know what they're going to do. I'm 50-50 on everything, but I think the damage has been done. I mean, even if they hold rates where they are right now, it's just going to cause absolute carnage down the road. So I think whether they increase 25 points or not is really here nor there. It's interesting that they think it's going to be around 7.2% over the next 12 months, because I would probably say they're probably bang on about that. But that's probably the actual well, not the CPI, the actual inflation that we're likely to see. The CPI, who knows, may go down to 3-4%, but actually, inflation is still going to be raging on, and things are still going to be going up in cost, as they always were, which I'll show you later on in this. So this chart here is really, really good because it illustrates just how far behind wages are. And, essentially you've got wages at 2.5%, 2022 Q4, and then you've got inflation at 7.18%. So you're talking about a 5.3% cut in people's pay. I mean, that is just... historically, that is absolutely huge. I mean, even in the 1970s, and definitely, as I'm going to show you in a chart, this time period is comparable to the 1970s with the level of consumer price inflation that we've had. If you look at it from that lens, like in the 1970s, wages were a big problem. They were rising too much. They were rising a lot. But right here, I mean, they're barely even rising. I mean, look, this chart goes all the way back to 2014. And yeah, they've gone up like slightly, but they're coming back down, and inflation is seemingly still up here, miles away from the wages. So this causes a major problem for the economy, because this doesn't even measure all the other factors like the interest rate hikes that have driven people's mortgage payments up significantly, and all the rest of the things that have happened. Because the reality is, whether you've been renting or whether you own a home, you've seen payments just absolutely skyrocket, unless of course you're in a fixed rate mortgage. But the thing is, even then, your maintenance costs have exploded. Little do you know, but go buy a roof. It's a lot more expensive than it was in 2019, or go do any work. And when wages are this negative, what sort of incentive, and I've been trying to think about this all week, what sort of incentive does that provide to young people to go and get a job and go work, to move out of their parents' basement? It just doesn't provide any incentive. I mean, a lot of young people are just thinking, well, and I'm sure they're thinking this, they're just thinking, well, what's it going to be like for me? Like, I'm never going to be able to afford a house. I'm never going to be... They've got nothing to think of and work for in the future. It's nothing like we've ever seen before. It's like the fabric of society is deteriorating at the most rapid pace we've ever seen it in history. And it's been going downhill since 2008. But anyways, this is another chart that just shows you where the economy is right now. You obviously had the boom in savings that happened during the pandemic, and then they have absolutely crashed. And yes, they are still high historically right now, but look at how fast they have come down. I mean, this is just unprecedented. And if it's come down this fast in this shorter period of time, just extrapolate this chart and you know where this line goes. You don't have to be real smart to work out what's going to happen, what happens next. I mean, even get a kid to look at this chart and say, draw what you think's going to happen next. They're going to draw the line down because there's nothing that is really impacting savings that's going to drive up the savings rate. Like I don't see anybody. I don't see savings going up from here. I don't see any things that are going to affect savings and make people save more right now. I just don't see that happening. And you got a lot of people relying on debt too. A lot of people are taking out more debt, just to keep the costs over their head, and they're just so far underwater, they're drowning. So I want to show you this chart because I think this is important. And I've showed it so many times, long-term viewers of this channel know this chart well by now. But essentially, this is the US inflation rate, but Canada is essentially coupled to the US economy in a lot of ways. And in a way worse position, might I add, because it's got a lack of diversification. The US has got more diversification than Canada has. But if you look, the CPIU is essentially what the government measures inflation with right now. And you can see it peaked around like 8% or whatever it was, and it's coming back down. And they follow the same trajectory throughout. It's just the CPIU is massively understating inflation. It's telling you that inflation is 8% when it's really 17, 18%. And that's what I talk about when I said about the 1970s, how this is comparable to the 1970s from an inflation standpoint, is because yes, the CPI is a lot lower than it was during the 1970s. But this chart, it goes back to 1980, and you can see where the CPI was coming back down from. And you can see that it was up there. It was up there at the same level it was in the 1970s, but wages were nowhere near in the same place. So people are losing money hand over fist, whether they realize it or not. And that's just pure fact of the matter. People with a bigger budget surplus aren't going to realize it. But, so many people just don't even do their basic, how much they're being charged for different things, like their liabilities, essentially, their assets, their incoming money, and their outgoing expenses. Nobody even does that on an Excel spreadsheet, and it's so easy to do, like just basic budgeting. It doesn't even have to be that complex. I wanted to show you this because this is it's highly predictable. We know about the yield curve's predictability. And if you look at the yield curve, and unfortunately for some reason TradingView has deleted the late 80s data, but I've used this before, so other videos I've talked about this and showed this. But we've got this extreme inversion right now, which you can see here. So you've got the 10-year, which is at 2.86%, which is just unbelievable. And then you've got the 2-year, which is at 3.57%. So it is massively inverted. And if you go back and you look at some of the periods in times where it's inverted before, look at this. Look at the spread there. This is in 2019, and of course we know what happened in 2020. Likely a recession was coming anyways, just nobody knew what was going to happen with the pandemic. I mean, maybe some people did. I'll leave you to speculate on that, but it is kind of crazy how it inverted in late 2019, and then you had the pandemic and everything happened. And again, like if we go back to 2007, 2008, even less of an inversion there in 2007 than you had in 2019. And then if you go back to the .com, it inverted slightly again there as well. So you can see that there is obviously correlation between when the yield curve inverts and when bad events happen. And the inversion, the spread that you get between it obviously means something, because if you look at this, and I know that chart didn't go as far to show you, but if you look at this, this shows you how the inversion is as bad as it was during the banking crisis in the late 80s. And you know, I keep saying about a banking crisis, and everybody thinks the banks are rock solid in this country, yet nobody dives into their balance sheets and looks how leveraged they are. I don't get it. It's all public information. I just guess nobody wants to talk about it, especially people like the Financial Post, because they're doing articles for the banks. The banks are constantly advertising on their platform, so they have a complete conflict of interest. Like, I'm not running RBC adverts, so I have no conflict of interest. I really don't care. But you can clearly see how it's just gone down, and it's gone way down to the late 1980s, where you had all these financial institutions go bust. And if you look at CDIC's website, that's the Canadian Deposit Insurance website, they actually list all the financial institutions that have gone under in Canada, the whole history of all financial institutions that have gone under. And during that period of time, half of all the financial institutions that went bust during that period of time, from around 1985 to 1995. So the yield curve is telling us something extremely bad is going to happen. We really don't know what it is, but we know the banks are like in a precarious place. We know the consumer's in a precarious place because of all these charts. Like, we can see it. You know, this is why I have a high degree of confidence in thinking that something bad is going to happen. You've got the yield curve inverted. You've got real wage growth that is way negative. You've got household savings that is just collapsing at an alarming rate. And, you know, these things, they are things that you need to look at. And the inflation rate has ran so high, the consumer is broke. They are completely broke. And I just really don't understand how people think that we can somehow get ourselves out of this situation with a soft landing. I just do not believe that that is possible. So, I mean, there's always a slight probability that that can happen, but I just do not see how without like hyperinflating the currency somehow. Because, you know, from what is happening with the yield curve in Canada compared to other G7 countries, it doesn't look good. It looks like something in Canada is going to happen before all the other countries, because you've got yield curve inversions all over the place. It's not just Canada, it's also the United States, it's also in the UK too. So there's lots of yield curve inversions and there's lots of problems potentially ahead. So thank you so much for joining me this evening, and I will see you in the next one. If you enjoyed this, you might like this video here. You might also like that video there. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and let me know what you think. Do you think the Bank of Canada matters? What do you think of the upcoming rate hike? Let me know. I love reading your comments. See you in the next one, guys. Bye-bye.